Tonebenders, a Sound Designers podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to Tonebenders. I will be your host today. I'm Timothy Muirhead. You can follow our podcast via Twitter at The Tonebenders. Our guest today needs no introduction. It's Paul Davies. He's joining me from London, England. Paul is a sound designer and supervising sound editor with a long and impressive list of credits. He might be best known for his longtime collaboration with director Lynne Ramsay, having created the tracks for Ratcatcher, Morven Caller, We Need to Talk About Kevin, and the latest film, You Were Never Really Here, which really threw me for a loop. That is a really interesting movie. I really enjoyed it. Other credits include Steve McQueen's Hunger, John Mayberry's Love is the Devil, and Stephen Frears' The Queen, and the recent A Private War, which we actually just talked to Andrew Stirk about in episode 91. Paul is also one of the guest speakers at the upcoming School of Sound Symposium in London from April 24th to 27th. You can find out more about the School of Sound at schoolofsound.co.uk. Welcome to the show, Paul. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me, Tim.
You may disagree with this, but I feel like one of the things that you're really good at is creating a mood for a film. There are guys out there who can make amazing robot sounds and amazing battles with explosions, and I'm sure you're very good at all of that too. But what I feel like you excel at is just creating a mood for a film. I'm a really big fan of the way you can create a whole soundtrack that can keep me on my toes in a way that I feel like is not just inserting slot A into tab B. You're coming up with sounds that make me uncomfortable a lot of the time, and I thank you for that.
Well, good. Well, thank you, and I'm glad you have been uncomfortable watching my films, Tim. I think I agree with absolutely what you just said. It seems to be, and I'm just going back feedback of directors and other filmmakers I've worked with. This is when they seek me out. This is generally when they seek me out. I've done my share of genre films and spaceship films and magical kids films, but I think that, yes, what I'm known for consistently time and time and again is setting this mood with an atmosphere and perhaps getting inside the head of the characters as well within the world, the sound world of the film.
Well put.
Yes, so yes, that's thank you. I'm glad you you also see that as well.
Well, that's not an easy thing to do. It's something that you also attack in different ways from film to film. For instance, I mentioned in the intro that I recently watched You Were Never Really Here.
Yeah.
And that film, there are a lot of different ways that you're keeping me on my toes in terms of drastic volume shifts.
Yes.
And then also unexpected ambiences, I guess.
Yes.
How much time do you get to experiment on a film like that to come up with how you're going to tackle these issues?
Well, that film was sort of an ideal scenario in many ways. That's the fifth collaboration, fourth feature film with Lynne over a 20-year period. We know each other very well by now, obviously, and having been through various stages of her filmmaking career and my own career. I was on the film for a considerable amount of time. On the last day of the final mix after the review, I looked at the first date of my very first session for the film. That was 12 months previously. But I hadn't been working for 12 months consistently, I must emphasise. I've been working on things, but I had been sending material during the picture edit with Joe Beanie and Lynne. Were working first in LA, then came to London and worked in London. I did see various cuts of the film, was sent various cuts of the film. I'd read the script before, I'd read the source material, I'd talked to Lynne beforehand. We didn't quite have as much pre-production as we'd like because she was rushed into pre-production because of Joaquin Phoenix suddenly became available. And so the whole thing was put into production a little earlier than she anticipated or would have wished for, but that was the nature of it. So suddenly film got green-lit maybe a few months before she actually expected it to have been. So we didn't have quite those conversations we're expecting to have. But nonetheless, we were able to work together alongside each other quite a period of time. And I think that it must be said that her collaborators, which include Joe and Johnny Greenwood and Graham Stewart, are all very important figures in sort of constructing the soundtrack with an input to the soundtrack and the collaboration between all of us. And Joe Beanie, the editor, has got a very keen ear for sound as well. So by the time we got to the stage where unexpectedly got into Cannes Film Festival, because I think, again, we weren't anticipating to be ready for Cannes, all the preparation work came to good stead because we suddenly had to sort of almost do what I'd call an enhanced temp dub. We wanted to have a mix of the film which the audience would see as a complete film, even though we came back afterwards and did another version and built on what we'd achieved in Cannes. But I think it played like that in Cannes, but we were only able to achieve that because I think a lot of the groundwork and the conceptual work had been done during that picture editing process.
Yeah, I noticed in the credits for the film, there's two separate mix teams
Yes.
credited, a Cannes mix team and then the final mix team.
Absolutely, yes. There was an 8 or 9 day mix for Cannes, so it's more than you usually get for 3 or 4 days for a temp dub. So it was actually a complete mix, but not quite what you would get for a full feature mix. Then we came back and did another mix again with Andrew Stirk. I mean, this was a question, the two different mix teams are a question that was of availability, not we chose one mix team over another. It's because it was our dates were constantly shifting, schedules, and people became available or not available. So both teams did an excellent job.
So when you first worked with Lynne Ramsay, I think you mentioned 20 years ago, what happened in that relationship that made her keep coming back?
People always ask, they know we're both graduates, alumni of the National Film and Television School here in the UK. We were sort of different generations or different years of that school, and I'm a bit older, and I was a bit before Lynne. And I knew her very slightly in film school, a little bit in film school, and I didn't work in any of the shorts she made subsequent to leaving the film school, graduating from film school. But I was brought on board Ratcatcher because I knew Richard Flynn, I knew Lucia Zucchetti, the editor, and they asked me to become involved, and that's the first time we worked together. And it was a very quick sound editorial process. It wasn't the 12 months period we had you never hear. As I recall, I think it was a 4-week sound effects edit. It was more like what you'd get for a TV movie. Fortunately, I mean, they were editing. I was working for a company at that time. I wasn't freelance, and Lucia and Lynne were editing in the same building. So I saw lots of different versions of the cuts. We talked a lot, and then by the time it came to the actual physical sound editing process, we were able to work very efficiently. But I think we found we worked very well together. And Lynne, I think for the first time, was able to truly explore sound post-production, what she could do with it in her films. She suddenly saw there was another canvas she could explore, and then we worked together through More Than Colour, and then there was various projects that didn't come to fruition. Then Kevin, and then you never really hear. So I think the relationship built up naturally, and then it was now a friendship, and obviously as well as a professional relationship.
So you're speaking at the School of Sound this year. This is not the first time you've spoken at it, is it?
Yes, I spoke with Lynne. Lynne and I did a joint session, I think back in 2005. So I think the only body of work we'd obviously had was at that time was Ratcatcher and More Than Colour. And we looked at one of the shorts as well. I think we looked at an extract from Gasman, and we looked at some of Lynne's key influences. Mayor Darren, I think, remember being particularly one of them, and Bresson.
So I'm in North America. I became aware of the School of Sound through the book, Soundscapes.
That's correct. That's right, yes.
Back in maybe mid-2000s, I came across that book and was like, oh my God, I had no idea that this symposium was happening. How did you first come across it?
I became naturally aware through my connections to the film school. I think maybe doing some workshops there, that Larry was organising this entity called School of Sound. Because there's various other schools of sound besides the biennial one in central London. There's other ventures or the workshops which Larry holds throughout the year in different countries. And I think I did a School of Sound presentation for him in Dundee. I remember being terribly nervous and very ill-prepared, and that taught me a big lesson. I thought you could come in and busk it, as it were, and I've learned that you couldn't. So by the time I came to do the workshop with the session with Lynne, we were much better prepared and rehearsed.
So you've got a couple months to prepare for this year, but do you know what your talk is going to be about this year?
I think probably what we touched on before, and I think, one's tempted to sort of think that you see all these other eminent contributors invited, and you think that you have to be as well researched or talk about film history as they are. And I think perhaps what I'll talk about is more the idea of subjective sound, and perhaps what we spoke about earlier, what I'm known for, is how do you get inside the head of a character? For example, what's interesting about You Never Really Hear is where I regard it is the entire film soundtrack is from Joaquin's point of view. The idea of first person in a film is an interesting one, with a narrative where you can describe what's going on in the character's head in a story. In film, what do you traditionally do to get inside the character's head? You put a voiceover or you put some music on. How do you explore that? How do you get inside the head of a character? You have to understand the story, you have to understand the character's motivation. What are they hearing? The key phrase from Lynne, and I think she's stated this in several interviews herself, Joaquin's character, Joe, is a man with a head full of broken glass. He's walking around New York with a head full of broken glass. So not literally, we're not hearing broken glass, but that gives you the image, the sound image. The world of the mother's house is more akin to the sound world which Lynne and I might have explored in Ratcatcher, or perhaps the techniques we used in Hunger, which is very stripped back. We hear hardly any exterior sound, a little wind through a window, something like that.
I need my space.
Your what?
My space.
All right, go get your space downstairs.
Oh, no.
Are you sure you're downstairs, all right?
What? Yeah. Yes, I do.
Deliberately silent, room tones, enhanced Foley. We hear the dialogue. Step outside the neighbourhood. He comes out of his house, he hears the dog barking. Some distant birds and wind. Then into New York. And that New York is hyper realised or stylised. It's overwhelming. I remember having several discussions on the dub stage where other voices producers going, "Listen, this is too much." Well, it is too much. I mean, it's more than if you were in a conventional movie, character walks from out of house, down his street and out into New York City. Well, we make it a bit louder. We don't sort of hit the audience full on with a world of screaming overhead trains and overwhelming traffic. I think the big thing for me, what is the central idea of this film? What is the idea of the character? And for me, it's dislocation. The character is separated from his world. He's not comfortable in the environment. He's alienated from the environment. The only safe place of any measure, but of course there's terrible memories within that safe place, is his mother's house and his relationship with his mother. The outside world is this overwhelming, threatening world. Even the birds, when he steps into the lake, to put, spoiler alert, with his mother's body, is the birds are hyper-real, the crickets are hyper-real, the traffic's hyper-real, everything, the train sounds. During the period when I think Lynne was shooting, I happened to see an exhibition at the Tate Modern Gallery here in London, and it was an American video artist, Charles Atlas. It was a work of several TV monitors showing images of Merce Cunningham, the famous choreographer, and then in front of these several monitors there were 4 speakers, and each speaker was playing back traffic sound or interior traffic sound, but each speaker was different. They were in a straight line, so it wasn't sort of surround sound, all the sounds are of the same family. I think the sound was actually put together, a composition piece was by John Cage, who's Merce Cunningham's creative and life partner. It was very interesting. The effect on the monitors was quite peaceful, wasn't alienating, but I thought, this is an idea. What if within our New York, each speaker is playing a different traffic sound? So what you're hearing actually when he steps out into the underpass in New York is we hear a 5.0 surround normal traffic, but underneath that, this is what I call the special 5.0s, which happen throughout the film, where each leg is different, but of the same family, but maybe a completely different file. And actually, I think one leg is even running backwards.
Wow.
And what this creates is, you're not aware of that as an audience member or even as a sound professional, but what it creates is, people have constantly said, why do I feel uncomfortable? That's why you feel uncomfortable, because the sound feels like your head's being pulled apart somehow. That's really it was an understanding of what that character was. And then that allowed us sound concept. And I remember speaking to Lynne about all this, and she said, yes, great, go for it. When I started putting different legs in the sort of surround sound, I felt I was breaking some sort of unwritten rule, and I felt I was...
Well, you were.
Yeah, I was. I was.
But it worked.
It worked, yes. And I think even the train sound at the beginning, which was, as I think I'm right, I don't think the start of the train over the production company logos right at the front of the film, that wasn't in the can mix, but a lot of the sound came for that. There's a key sequence in the film where Joe, the Joaquin Phoenix character, is on the train. It's quite a long sequence, and there's various flashbacks happen during that sequence where Joe pieces together what's happened. And the train's journey of Joe just is from 2 11-minute takes of Joaquin sitting on a train, just looking out the window, just doing his stuff. There's 2 continuous 11-minute takes. And from that, within each take, there's a certain point where the train must have passed over something on the rails when it produces this quite interesting harmonic, this ooh sound. Forgive my bad pitching and singing, but it's sort of singing harmonic sound, which is in the sync sound, which was recorded by Drew Cunin. And then, Lynne said, that sound, that's an interesting sound. I like that used as sort of like a iconic or a recurring motif throughout the film. And so I isolated that sound, and I remember started playing around with Isotope Iris synthesizer and painting things out, and I thought, what am I doing here? Nothing against Isotope. I thought, what I need is a resonant bandpass filter. So I just used an old-fashioned technique at that, and then I think I stretched it as well with a Paul stretch, so I could lengthen the sound. And then that sound is used in the train sound at the beginning, but it reoccurs several times in the film.
A reaction to that sound off the top of the film. For anyone who hasn't seen the film yet, as the logos of the various movie studios come up off the beginning, you're hearing this kind of droney sound. And 30 seconds into it, my wife, who was watching it with me, just turned to me and said, "What kind of movie is this? Like, what are we getting ourselves into?" Like, it really put her on edge, like right from the start, before we'd even seen a frame of the actual film. She was already like, what am I getting into here? So I don't know that I've ever heard a sound off the top of a movie like immediately make someone realize they're going down a rabbit hole. So it was really effective.
Yes, I mean, I think that was a decision. And I did come to that post, having had the advantage of watching it with an audience at Cannes and going down very well, thinking, you know what we need to do? We need to stick the big train sort of montage sequence at the beginning of the film. I mean, there's nothing it's mostly sort of mixing and layering. There's nothing very fancy or funky going on with the plugins for most of this film.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a off-the-shelf phaser, which I chose because it sounded to me like a 70s analog phaser. I loved that. So it reminded me of the sound a little bit that David Bowie achieved on Station to Station, the song.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
Also Kraftwerk on Trans-Europe Express. When I said to the mixer, Andrew Sturck, I said, I think we've just mixed Trans-Europe Express, remixed it. But yes, it does set it up. In a way, that was sort of, we'd already established that precedent, and we need to talk about Kevin with the famous, which is now famous, sprinkler sound, which we hear sound of the sprinkler, and we see the billowing curtains. It's a sound and a shot which only resolves itself basically 4/5 of the way into the movie, where we realise the significance of this sprinkler, and why is it, and this billowing curtain, why is it so ominous? Well, all right, it is ominous but it sets it up in the audience's mind. Mm-hmm. And we did this a little bit in Morven Caller, and I think this is the first time I realised it. If you set up with the flickering lights, when you see the dead body of the boyfriend, with the flickering lights of the Christmas tree and the hum of the computer, and with no music, you force the audience to listen. The audience is then listening, and then we'll listen to the rest of the film. But that's also what we're saying, is we're setting up the movie, we're also saying sound is important within this story.
For sure. So speaking of pop stars with David Bowie and stuff, the composer for You Are Never Really Here was Johnny Greenwood.
Yes.
Who we all got to know as the guitarist from Radiohead.
Yes.
But has now more than set himself apart as a top-notch composer.
Absolutely, yes.
It seems like he's doing some of the work of sound effects sometimes, and you're doing some of the work of music sometimes.
Yes, I think that I work more closely with Johnny's key collaborator, which is Graham Stewart, who is Johnny's producer, engineer, and music editor. Both Graham and myself went through the film and constructed a roadmap about what sounds and what music cues we would hear where. That was obviously based on part of what had already been established with Joe and Lynn's work within the cutting copy as well. It was, I suppose, an evolutionary process, an organic process, working with, so I worked with Graham, particularly more closely on this film. We used to about Kevin. It was a sort of, the relationship was just beginning then, but I think it was actually a particularly close collaboration. Graham could go away and sort of work with Johnny's cues, and sort of was aware of what I was doing, and then I was aware of what they were doing. So I think it's well before Cannes we were aware of what each other was doing within the tracks.
Was there a lot of back and forth? Did you do revisions based on the music? Did they do revisions of the music based on the sound effects?
Yes, I think it was back and forth. And I think it was back and forth, particularly the Cannes version. We all rushed into sort of sound editorial and music before we'd expected to be. And so there was very little time to reflect. But post-Cannes, there was plenty of time to reflect. And then I remember having a conference with Joe, Lynn, myself and Graham and Linda Forson, the dialogue editor, talking about the path forward and what we thought was successful in the Cannes version, what we could build on. And so, yes, there was a lot of back and forth at that point. And I think that's probably post-Cannes we constructed a roadmap about the way ahead.
Thank you very much for coming on the show today. I'm really glad that I got to talk to you because, as I mentioned, I'm a big fan of your work. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it to the School of Sound this year. Unfortunately, it's across an ocean for me. But I look forward to hearing feedback from those that do on your talk, and I'm sure it's going to be great.
Okay, brilliant. All right, Tim. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Tonebenders. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. If you listen on iTunes or Stitcher, please write us a review while you're there. To support the show, go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click through our Amazon link or leave us a tip. You can also download and listen to our entire show archive there and leave a comment on our site or on SoundCloud. Keep up to date by following at the Tonebenders on Twitter or find Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook and YouTube. Email us with your questions and ideas at info@tonebenderspodcast.com.